If you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
The day my daughter shocked me. Have you ever had a moment when a child said something so simple, so innocent, that it completely shattered a belief you had carried for years? What if I told you that one ordinary sentence from my daughter stopped me in my tracks, exposed a truth I had been hiding from myself, and changed the way I looked at marriage, family, happiness, and even my future? If you have ever felt exhausted, unappreciated, overwhelmed by responsibilities, or secretly wondered whether all your hard work is actually making life better, then this story may feel strangely personal. Stay with me, because what happened in my family that day was not dramatic in the way movies are dramatic. There were no loud arguments, no shocking scandals, no life-threatening emergencies. Yet the lesson hidden inside that moment was powerful enough to change everything. My name is Sarah, and I live a fairly ordinary life in the United States. If you had met me a year ago, you probably would have thought I had everything under control. I was married to a good man. We had a beautiful daughter. We lived in a quiet neighborhood where children rode bicycles on sunny afternoons and neighbors waved politely while walking their dogs. From the outside, my life looked exactly like the kind of life many people work hard to build. The strange thing about appearances is that they can be incredibly convincing. Every morning, I woke up before everyone else. I prepared breakfast. I packed lunches. I cleaned the kitchen. I organized schedules. I answered emails. I made sure appointments were remembered and bills were paid. If something needed to be done, I handled it. If someone needed help, I was there. If a problem appeared, I fixed it. At first, I felt proud of that. Then, little by little, something changed. I began measuring my value by how useful I was to other people. It happened so gradually that I barely noticed. Psychologists often talk about something called the helper identity. It happens when a person becomes so focused on taking care of others that they start believing their worth depends entirely on what they provide. Research has shown that chronic caregivers often experience emotional exhaustion, not because they do not love their families, but because they forget that their own emotional needs matter too. I did not know the scientific term at the time. I only knew that I felt tired. Not physically tired. A deeper kind of tired. The kind that follows you even after a full night's sleep. The kind that quietly whispers, "Keep going. Everyone else needs you." In modern American life, this experience is more common than many people realize. Social media shows smiling families, perfect vacations, beautiful homes, successful careers. What it rarely shows are the moments when people sit alone wondering why they still feel empty despite doing everything right. I never talked about those feelings. Most people don't. Instead, I became better at pretending. If someone asked how I was doing, I smiled. "I'm great." If someone complimented my family, I smiled. "Thank you." If someone told me I seemed to have everything together, I smiled again. Inside, however, I felt like I was running a marathon that never ended. The pressure was not coming from my husband. It was not coming from my daughter. It was not even coming from my friends. Most of it was coming from me. I had created invisible rules. A good mother should never complain. A good wife should always be supportive. A good woman should handle everything gracefully. The problem with invisible rules is that they can become invisible prisons. One Tuesday evening, after what felt like an endless day, I was standing in the kitchen preparing dinner. My husband was finishing some work. My daughter was sitting at the table drawing pictures with colored markers. The house was quiet. Peaceful, even. At least on the surface. I remember feeling frustrated because dinner was taking longer than expected. The laundry still needed folding. Several emails were waiting for replies. The next day was already packed with responsibilities. My mind was racing through 100 unfinished tasks. Then my daughter looked up from her drawing. "Mom?" I answered without turning around. "Yes, sweetheart?" There was a pause. A small pause. The kind of pause that seems completely unimportant until you realize later that it changed everything. Then she asked a question. A simple question. One that should have been easy to answer. One that wasn't. "Mom, when are you happy?" I froze. For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood. I turned around and looked at her. She was not joking. She was not being dramatic. She genuinely wanted to know. "When am I happy?" I repeated. She nodded. "Yes. You're always busy. You're always helping everyone. But when are you happy?" The room suddenly felt very quiet. My husband looked up. I looked at my daughter. And for the first time in a very long time, I could not find an answer. Not a real answer. I could list responsibilities. I could describe schedules. I could explain obligations. But happiness? My mind went blank. What shocked me most was not her question. It was my inability to answer it. Children have a remarkable ability to notice things adults overlook. Developmental psychologists often point out that children pay less attention to what adults say and far more attention to what adults repeatedly do. In other words, our habits become our true message. My daughter had been watching me. Not for one day. Not for 1 week. For years. And what she saw was a mother who loved her family deeply but rarely allowed herself to enjoy life. That realization hit harder than I expected. Because suddenly I wondered what lesson I had been teaching her without realizing it. Was I teaching her responsibility? Or was I teaching her self-sacrifice without balance? Was I showing her strength? Or was I showing her exhaustion disguised as strength? The questions kept coming. And the more I thought about them, the more uncomfortable I became. That evening, after everyone went to bed, I sat alone in the living room. The lights were off. The neighborhood was quiet. Outside, streetlights cast long shadows across the empty road. Inside, I kept replaying her words. "Mom, when are you happy?" It sounded so innocent. Yet it felt like the most important question anyone had asked me in years. I had no idea then that this single conversation would lead me to re-examine my marriage, my daily habits, my priorities, and the way I define success. I had no idea it would reveal a hidden struggle affecting countless families across America. And I certainly had no idea that the greatest lesson of my life would come from the person I thought I was teaching. That night, I finally understood something unsettling. Sometimes the people we are trying hardest to guide are quietly showing us the path instead. And what my daughter was about to teach me would change everything. A life that looked perfect. If someone had taken a photograph of my life during that period, most people would have assumed I was living the American dream. That is exactly what makes this part of the story so dangerous. The biggest problems are not always the ones that look frightening from the outside. Sometimes the most damaging struggles hide behind smiles, family dinners, holiday photos, and cheerful conversations. Looking back now, I realize that my daughter's question did not shock me because it came out of nowhere. It shocked me because it exposed something I had been working very hard not to see. The morning after she asked me, "Mom, when are you happy?" I woke up with those words still echoing in my head. I expected the feeling to disappear after breakfast or after a busy day of errands. It did not. Instead, the question followed me everywhere. While making coffee, I thought about it. While folding clothes, I thought about it. While driving to the grocery store, I thought about it. It was as if my mind had discovered a loose thread and could not stop pulling on it. What made the situation even stranger was that nothing seemed wrong. My husband and I were not fighting. Our daughter was healthy. We lived in a safe community. Financially, we were stable enough to avoid many of the worries that affect countless families across the United States. By all measurable standards, life was good. Yet there was a growing discomfort inside me that I could not ignore. Modern American culture often teaches us to chase visible achievements. We celebrate promotions, bigger homes, expensive vacations, academic success, and social status. These things are not inherently bad. The problem appears when people begin using them as proof that they must be happy. Researchers studying subjective well-being have found that external success and internal fulfillment are related, but they are not the same thing. A person can achieve many goals and still feel emotionally disconnected from their own life. At the time, I did not know those studies existed. I only knew that I was starting to question everything. One Saturday afternoon, our family attended a neighborhood barbecue. It was one of those classic American gatherings that seem to appear in every suburban community. Children played games on the lawn. Parents stood around talking near the grills. Music drifted softly through the air. Laughter came from every direction. If a filmmaker wanted to create a scene representing family happiness, this would have been the perfect setting. As I watched everyone enjoying themselves, I noticed something unexpected. I was not actually present. Physically, yes. Mentally, no. While everyone else relaxed, my brain was busy creating lists. Did I remember the appointment next week? Was there enough food at home? Had I answered that email? What should I prepare for dinner tomorrow? The human brain is remarkable. It can transport a person away from the present moment without moving a single inch. Standing there among smiling neighbors, I suddenly realized I was spending more time managing life than experiencing it. That realization felt uncomfortable. Then something happened that made the feeling even stronger. A neighbor approached me and said something that many people would consider a compliment. "Sarah, I don't know how you do it all. Your family always seems so happy and organized." I smiled automatically. "Thank you," I replied. But inside, a strange thought appeared. If she only knew. Not because my life was secretly falling apart. It wasn't. The truth was more complicated. I had become so focused on maintaining the appearance of having everything together that I rarely stopped to ask whether I was actually enjoying the life I was working so hard to maintain. That evening, after returning home, I found myself looking through old family photographs. There were pictures from birthdays, vacations, anniversaries, school events, and holiday celebrations. The memories were beautiful. Yet as I studied the images, I noticed something surprising. In nearly every picture, I was smiling. In nearly every memory, I remembered being stressed. It felt like looking at two different versions of reality. One version existed in photographs. The other existed in my mind. Both were real, but only one told the whole story. Around that time, I started paying closer attention to conversations around me. I noticed how often adults talked about being busy. It had almost become a badge of honor. People competed over who was more exhausted, who had the fullest schedule, who had the most responsibilities. Somewhere along the way, busyness had become associated with importance. The more overwhelmed you were, the more successful you appeared. But there was a hidden cost. Constant busyness leaves very little room for reflection. If every moment is filled with tasks, there is no space to ask difficult questions. Questions like, am I enjoying this season of life? Am I becoming the person I want to be? What example am I setting for my children? Those questions can be uncomfortable because they do not have simple answers. Yet they are often the questions that matter most. During the following weeks, I began noticing something about my daughter. She laughed often. She became excited about small things. A colorful butterfly. A funny joke. A drawing she was proud of. A new book from the library. Her happiness did not depend on perfection. It depended on attention. She was fully engaged with whatever was happening in that moment. Scientists sometimes refer to this state as psychological presence. People tend to experience greater satisfaction when their attention is focused on what they are currently doing rather than constantly worrying about the future. Children naturally do this. Adults often forget how. One evening, while helping my daughter with homework, she made a mistake. Then another. Then another. Instead of becoming frustrated, she laughed and tried again. Watching her, I felt almost jealous. When had I become so afraid of mistakes? When had I started treating every imperfection as evidence that I was failing? Somewhere between adulthood, marriage, parenting, and responsibility, I had quietly replaced curiosity with pressure. The most shocking part was realizing that nobody had forced me to do it. I had built those expectations myself. And if I had built them, perhaps I could change them. But change would require honesty. Real honesty. The kind that forces a person to stop hiding behind routines and achievements. The kind that asks whether a life that looks perfect is actually healthy. Late one night, I sat alone again, thinking about everything that had happened since my daughter's question. The answer still had not come. I still could not clearly explain when I felt happy. But for the first time, I was beginning to understand why. My problem was not a lack of blessings. My problem was a lack of awareness. I had become so focused on taking care of life that I had forgotten how to participate in it. And although I did not know it yet, the next conversation with my daughter would force me to confront a truth that was even more uncomfortable than the question she had already asked. A truth that would make me realize how much of my identity had been built around pleasing everyone except myself. The habit that was hurting me. Have you ever discovered that the thing everyone praises you for is the very thing quietly making your life harder? That was the uncomfortable realization waiting for me after my daughter asked the question I could not answer. For years, people had complimented me for being dependable. They admired how organized I was. They appreciated how much I cared about my family. Friends often told me I was strong. Neighbors said I seemed to have everything under control. Even relatives occasionally joked that I must have found a secret way to add extra hours to the day. Every compliment felt good for a moment. The problem was that I had started building my entire identity around those compliments. Without realizing it, I became addicted to being the person who could handle everything. At first, that sounds like a positive quality. In many ways, it is. Responsibility matters. Reliability matters. Caring for people matters. But anything, even a good thing, can become unhealthy when it grows without limits. What I did not understand at the time was that I had crossed an invisible line. I was no longer helping because I wanted to help. I was helping because I felt guilty if I did not. There is a major difference between those two motivations. One comes from love. The other comes from fear. Fear is a powerful force. It rarely announces itself dramatically. Instead, it whispers. It tells you that everyone is depending on you. It tells you that resting is selfish. It tells you that saying no makes you a bad person. It tells you that your value comes from what you do rather than who you are. And if you listen long enough, those whispers begin to sound like facts. One Monday morning, I experienced a moment that forced me to see this pattern more clearly than ever before. The day had barely started. My husband was getting ready for work. My daughter was preparing for school. The kitchen looked like a small tornado had passed through it. Breakfast dishes covered the counter. Backpacks sat near the door. A forgotten permission slip needed a signature. The dog wanted to go outside. My phone buzzed with notifications. On the surface, it was just another busy day. Then my husband said something simple. "You look tired." That should not have bothered me. It was an ordinary observation. But instead of agreeing, I immediately replied, "I'm fine." The answer came so quickly that it surprised even me. Why had I said that? The truth was obvious. I was tired. Very tired. Yet admitting it felt strangely uncomfortable. Later that day, I found myself thinking about the exchange. Psychologists have studied something called self-silencing behavior. It happens when people suppress their own needs, emotions, or struggles to maintain harmony or meet expectations. Over time, self-silencing can increase stress, anxiety, emotional exhaustion, and even relationship dissatisfaction. As I reflected on my own life, I realized I had become an expert at it. If I needed help, I stayed quiet. If I felt overwhelmed, I stayed quiet. If I wanted a break, I stayed quiet. I convinced myself that keeping everything inside was a sign of strength. In reality, it was becoming a source of weakness. That evening, another moment arrived that I still remember vividly. My daughter was sitting on the living room floor working on an art project. Colored paper, markers, glue sticks, and stickers were scattered everywhere. She looked completely absorbed in what she was creating. I sat nearby answering emails. At least, that was what I was pretending to do. In truth, I was staring at the screen without really reading anything. My mind was exhausted. Suddenly, my daughter held up her project and smiled. "Mom, look what I made." I glanced up briefly. "That's nice, sweetheart." Then I returned to my phone. A few seconds passed. Then she spoke again. This time her voice sounded different. "You didn't really look." The words were gentle. Not angry. Not accusatory. Just honest. I looked up again. She was right. I had not really looked. I had seen the paper. I had not seen her excitement. I had seen the project. I had not seen the pride behind it. That small interaction stayed with me long after she went to bed. Because deep down, I knew it represented something larger. I was physically present in my family's life, but emotionally distracted much of the time. Not because I did not love them. Quite the opposite. I was so busy trying to take care of everything that I was missing parts of the very life I was working to protect. The realization felt almost cruel. Imagine spending years building a beautiful garden while rarely stopping to enjoy the flowers. That was what my life had started to resemble. Around this time, I began noticing a pattern among many adults around me. Parents, coworkers, neighbors, friends. Everyone seemed exhausted. Everyone seemed busy. Everyone seemed trapped in a cycle of responsibilities. Yet many of us shared the same hidden belief: if we just worked a little harder, organized a little better, and sacrificed a little more, everything would finally feel manageable. The problem is that the finish line keeps moving. There is always another task. Another goal. Another responsibility. Another problem to solve. If happiness is postponed until everything is finished, happiness may never arrive. Researchers studying happiness have repeatedly found that people often overestimate how much future achievements will improve their emotional well-being. We imagine that the next milestone will bring lasting satisfaction. Then we reach it and immediately focus on the next one. It is called the arrival fallacy. The mistaken belief that happiness exists just beyond the next accomplishment. Looking back, I realized I had been living inside that fallacy for years. I told myself I would relax after the next busy week. Then after the next school event. Then after the next holiday. Then after the next project. Somehow, the opportunity never came. One night, after everyone was asleep, I stood in the kitchen and looked around. The counters were clean. The dishes were done. The house was quiet. Everything on my to-do list had finally been completed. This should have felt satisfying. Instead, I felt strangely empty. That was the moment the truth became impossible to ignore. My problem was not my schedule. My problem was my relationship with perfection. I had convinced myself that being a good wife and mother meant constantly giving more, doing more, fixing more, and carrying more. But what if that definition was wrong? What if the lesson my daughter was trying to teach me had nothing to do with productivity at all? What if she was showing me that love is not measured by how much you sacrifice, but by how fully you show up? The question unsettled me because it challenged everything I believed about myself. And as uncomfortable as that realization was, an even more powerful moment was coming. A single question during an ordinary family dinner would soon expose the hidden cost of my habits in a way I could no longer explain away. And when that happened, I would finally understand why my daughter had been watching me so closely all along. My daughter asked one question. Most life-changing moments do not arrive with dramatic music or flashing warning signs. They often appear disguised as ordinary conversations. A random Tuesday. A routine dinner. A simple question. Looking back now, I can see that the evening which changed my perspective forever looked completely normal from the outside. That is what makes it so fascinating. If someone had walked past our dining room window that night, they would have seen a typical American family sharing a meal together. Nothing more. Yet inside that room, a single question was about to expose something I had spent years hiding from myself. The strange thing is that I almost missed it. The day had been busy, just like countless days before it. I had spent the morning running errands, answering messages, organizing household tasks, and trying to stay ahead of responsibilities that seemed to multiply faster than I could complete them. By evening, I was mentally exhausted. Not the kind of exhaustion that comes from physical labor. This was different. It felt like carrying an invisible backpack filled with unfinished thoughts. Every task completed seemed to create 2 new tasks. Every solved problem revealed another waiting in line. Many adults living in the United States understand this feeling well. Modern life rewards productivity. We celebrate efficiency. We admire people who juggle multiple responsibilities. Yet very few people talk openly about the emotional cost of constantly operating in problem-solving mode. Neuroscience research suggests that chronic stress can keep the brain focused on threats, responsibilities, and future concerns, making it harder to fully experience the present moment. In simple terms, your mind becomes so busy preparing for tomorrow that it forgets to live today. That evening, our family sat down for dinner together. My husband talked about something that happened at work. My daughter described a funny moment from school. I listened while mentally planning the next day's schedule. Outwardly, I appeared engaged. Internally, I was somewhere else entirely. Then my daughter suddenly asked a question. At first, it seemed harmless. "Mom, what was your favorite part of today?" The question caught me off guard. I smiled and tried to think of an answer. Surprisingly, none came immediately. I could remember everything I had done. I could remember every responsibility, every task, every errand. Yet identifying my favorite moment felt strangely difficult. Eventually, I mentioned something generic about finishing a project. My daughter listened carefully. Then she tilted her head slightly. Children have a remarkable way of sensing when adults are giving incomplete answers. She stared at me for a few seconds before asking another question. This one landed much harder. "Did you have fun today?" The room became quiet. My husband looked toward me. My daughter waited patiently. It should have been an easy question. Instead, I felt something uncomfortable rise inside me. Did I have fun today? I searched my memory. I had been productive, responsible, efficient, helpful, organized. But fun? I honestly could not remember. The silence stretched longer than I intended. Finally, I laughed awkwardly and said, "Adults don't always think about fun." My daughter frowned. Not angrily. Curiously. Then she said something that I will never forget. "Why not?" It sounds almost absurd now. Such a small question. Such a simple question. Yet it hit me harder than many complex conversations I had experienced throughout adulthood. Why not? Why didn't I think about fun? Why had enjoyment become optional while responsibility became mandatory? Why did I believe everyone else's happiness deserved attention while my own could wait indefinitely? The questions started flooding my mind. Suddenly, I realized I had been teaching my daughter lessons I never intended to teach. Not through words. Through behavior. Children learn by observation far more than instruction. They notice patterns. They absorb habits. They study emotional reactions. They watch how adults handle stress, disappointment, success, and relationships. Every day, whether we realize it or not, we are demonstrating what life is supposed to look like. That realization sent a chill through me. What exactly had I been demonstrating? If my daughter grew up copying my habits, would she believe adulthood meant constant pressure? Would she think self-care was selfish? Would she assume happiness should always come after obligations are completed? Most importantly, would she learn that her value depended entirely on how much she did for others? The thought was deeply unsettling. Because for the first time, I saw my behavior through her eyes instead of my own. What I saw was not a strong woman balancing life beautifully. What I saw was a woman who rarely gave herself permission to enjoy the life she worked so hard to create. That perspective changed everything. After dinner, my daughter returned to her room. My husband began cleaning the kitchen. I remained at the table staring at my half-finished glass of water. My mind kept replaying the conversation. Something about it felt impossible to ignore. Around that time, I came across an interesting psychological concept called emotional modeling. Researchers have found that children often develop attitudes toward happiness, stress, relationships, and self-worth based on what they observe in their caregivers. In other words, parents do not simply teach children through advice. They teach through daily example. Suddenly, a troubling possibility emerged. What if my daughter's question was not really about me? What if she was trying to understand her own future? Perhaps she was looking at adulthood and wondering whether growing up meant becoming permanently overwhelmed. Perhaps she was trying to determine whether happiness disappears when responsibility arrives. Perhaps she was asking questions because she noticed something I refused to acknowledge. The more I thought about it, the more uncomfortable I became. Because deep down, I knew there was truth hidden inside her curiosity. Over the following days, I started paying closer attention to my routines. What I discovered shocked me. Nearly every hour of my day revolved around obligations. Very little time was dedicated to joy, creativity, rest, reflection, or simple enjoyment. Even activities I once loved had gradually disappeared. Reading for pleasure. Taking walks without a purpose. Sitting quietly with a cup of coffee. Listening to music. Laughing without checking the clock. Somewhere along the way, I had convinced myself these things were luxuries rather than necessities. Yet science consistently suggests otherwise. Studies show that moments of enjoyment, connection, and recovery are not distractions from a healthy life. They are essential components of one. Without them, stress accumulates. Emotional energy declines. Relationships suffer. Perspective narrows. That realization was difficult to accept because it challenged a belief I had carried for years. I believed sacrifice was always noble. But what if excessive sacrifice creates unintended consequences? What if constantly neglecting yourself teaches the people you love to neglect themselves too? Late one evening, while reflecting on all of this, a realization finally emerged. My daughter had not been criticizing me. She had been trying to understand me. And in doing so, she had accidentally revealed a truth I desperately needed to see. The life I was living looked successful from the outside. But inside, something important was missing. I still did not fully understand what needed to change. I still did not know how to fix it. But I could feel the beginning of a transformation. Because once you see a truth clearly, it becomes impossible to unsee it. And very soon. An ordinary moment outside our home would reveal another piece of the puzzle, a lesson hidden in plain sight that would finally help me understand what my daughter had been trying to teach me all along. The moment I couldn't answer. Imagine spending years believing you are doing everything right, only to discover that the most important question in your life has no answer. Not because the answer is complicated. Not because the answer is hidden. But because somewhere along the way, you stopped asking yourself the question altogether. That was the situation I found myself in, and what happened next still surprises me when I think about it today. Up to that point, my daughter's questions had already unsettled me. First she asked when I was happy. Then she asked why adults seemed to stop thinking about fun. Then she noticed that I was rarely fully present. Each conversation felt small on the surface, but together they were creating a crack in the story I had been telling myself for years. The story was simple. I believed that if I worked hard enough, cared enough, planned enough, and sacrificed enough, everything would eventually feel right. Yet something was missing. The strange part was that I could feel the missing piece, but I could not identify it. A few days later, our family attended a community event in our neighborhood. These events are common in many parts of the United States. Local families gather, children play games, food trucks line the streets, and neighbors spend a few hours enjoying time together. It is the kind of event that looks wonderful in photographs. Smiling faces. Bright sunshine. Happy families. As we walked through the crowd, I noticed something unusual. My daughter seemed fascinated by people. She was not looking at decorations or activities. She was watching faces. She would point toward someone laughing with friends or a family sitting together and quietly ask questions. Do you think they're happy? Why is that lady smiling? Do those people know each other? At first, I gave simple answers. Then I started paying attention myself. What I noticed was interesting. Some people looked genuinely relaxed. Others appeared distracted despite being surrounded by fun activities. A few adults spent most of their time staring at their phones. Some parents watched their children play. Others looked exhausted. Suddenly, I realized something important. Happiness is much harder to recognize than success. Success often has visible signs. Bigger houses. Better jobs. New cars. Expensive vacations. Happiness is different. It hides inside conversations, relationships, attention, gratitude, and presence. You cannot always see it from the outside. That realization stayed with me throughout the afternoon. Later, while my daughter and I were sitting together on a bench, she asked another question. This one seemed harmless. In fact, it sounded so ordinary that I almost answered automatically. Mom, she said, what makes you happy? The moment the words left her mouth, my heart sank. Because despite everything that had happened over the previous weeks, despite all the thinking and reflecting I had been doing, I still did not know how to answer. I knew what made me busy. I knew what made me responsible. I knew what made me useful. I knew what made other people happy. But what made me happy? The answer should have come immediately. Instead, there was silence. A long silence. Long enough for my daughter to notice. Long enough for me to feel embarrassed. Long enough for me to realize this was not a normal problem. Most adults can name favorite foods, favorite movies, favorite vacation spots, or favorite hobbies. Yet I struggled to identify the things that genuinely brought joy into my life. The silence became the answer. My daughter looked at me with curiosity rather than judgment. Children rarely criticize in the way adults do. They simply notice. Then she said something that completely caught me off guard. "That's sad." I laughed awkwardly. "What do you mean?" She shrugged. "You always know what everybody else likes." Then she added, "But you don't know what you like." Her words landed with surprising force. Not because they were harsh. Because they were true. For years, I had become an expert on everyone else's needs. I knew my husband's favorite meals. I knew my daughter's favorite books. I knew family schedules, preferences, routines, goals, and responsibilities. Yet when asked about my own happiness, I could barely respond. Psychologists often discuss a phenomenon called identity diffusion. It can occur when people become so focused on fulfilling roles that they lose connection with their personal interests, desires, and values. Parents are particularly vulnerable because caregiving naturally requires attention toward others. The problem arises when caring for others completely replaces caring about oneself. Sitting there beside my daughter, I began wondering whether that had happened to me. Had I become so focused on being a good mother that I forgot how to be myself? Had I become so focused on helping others enjoy life that I stopped participating in it? The questions were uncomfortable. Yet they felt necessary. As the afternoon continued, I found myself observing my daughter differently. She approached life with curiosity. She asked questions. She explored. She laughed easily. She was not obsessed with productivity. She was not measuring her value through accomplishments. She was simply engaged with the world around her. Research consistently shows that curiosity and engagement are closely connected to well-being. People who remain curious tend to experience greater resilience, stronger relationships, and higher levels of life satisfaction. Children often possess this naturally. Adults often lose it beneath layers of responsibility. Watching my daughter, I realized something surprising. She was not trying to teach me through lectures. She was teaching me through example. The lesson was hiding in plain sight. She paid attention to what mattered. I paid attention to what needed to be done. Both were important. But only one left room for joy. On the drive home, her question continued echoing in my mind. What makes you happy? For the first time, I decided not to avoid it. I did not distract myself with chores. I did not bury the discomfort beneath another busy schedule. Instead, I sat with the question. Later that evening, after the house became quiet, I opened a notebook and wrote it at the top of a blank page. What makes me happy? At first, nothing came to mind. Then slowly, memories appeared. Reading a good book on a rainy afternoon. Taking a walk without checking the time. Having an honest conversation with my husband. Listening to music while drinking coffee in the morning. Watching my daughter laugh. Seeing a sunset. Writing my thoughts down. None of these things were expensive. None required major life changes. Most had been available all along. The shocking truth was that I had not lost happiness. I had stopped making room for it. That realization changed everything. Because for the first time, I understood that the problem was not my family, my responsibilities, or my life in America. The problem was the belief that joy should always wait until after the work was done. And once I recognized that belief, I could finally begin challenging it. What I did not know yet was that an ordinary walk through our neighborhood would soon reveal an even deeper lesson, one that would connect my marriage, my family, and my daughter's wisdom in a way I never expected. What I started noticing. What if the lesson that could change your life was sitting in front of you every day, but you were moving too fast to see it? That question stayed with me after I finally admitted something I had been avoiding for years. I had not lost happiness. I had simply stopped paying attention to it. The realization felt both encouraging and unsettling. Encouraging because happiness was not gone forever. Unsettling because it meant I had been overlooking it in my own life for a very long time. After writing down the simple things that genuinely brought me joy, I made a decision. Nothing dramatic. Nothing extreme. I would start paying closer attention to the world around me. Not to solve problems. Not to improve efficiency. Not to complete another goal. Just to notice. It sounds simple, but for someone whose brain had been operating in constant productivity mode, it felt surprisingly difficult. During the following week, I began taking short walks through our neighborhood. At first, these walks felt almost pointless. I was so accustomed to doing things for a reason that walking without an objective seemed strangely uncomfortable. Yet something interesting happened. The slower I moved, the more I noticed. There was an elderly man who sat on the same porch every morning drinking coffee and waving at people who passed by. There was a young couple who always walked their dog together after dinner. There was a mother who spent nearly an hour every evening teaching her son how to ride a bicycle. These were ordinary moments. The kind most people overlook. But once I started paying attention, I realized they contained something powerful. They revealed how people actually lived, not how they presented themselves online. Social media often creates the illusion that happiness comes from extraordinary experiences. Luxury vacations. Perfect homes. Major achievements. Viral moments. Yet as I observed the people around me, a different pattern emerged. Many of the happiest moments seemed surprisingly small. A conversation. A shared laugh. A walk. A family meal. A quiet evening together. Researchers studying positive psychology have found that meaningful relationships consistently rank among the strongest predictors of long-term well-being. Not income. Not status. Not fame. Relationships. As obvious as that sounds, modern life makes it easy to forget. One afternoon, while walking with my daughter, we passed a small neighborhood playground. Several children were playing while parents sat nearby talking. My daughter immediately ran toward the swings. I sat on a bench and watched. At first, I intended to check my phone. Then I stopped myself. Instead, I simply observed. What happened over the next 20 minutes surprised me. I noticed how naturally children connect with one another. They introduce themselves without worrying about status. They laugh without calculating how they appear. They become fully engaged in games without thinking about productivity. Most importantly, they recover quickly from small disappointments. One child fell while running. Within minutes, he was laughing again. Watching this reminded me of something psychologists often discuss. Children are remarkably resilient because they spend less time resisting reality. When something happens, they experience it, process it, and move forward. Adults frequently do the opposite. We replay mistakes. Analyze conversations. predict future problems, worry about outcomes we cannot control. In many cases, we suffer more from our thoughts than from the actual events themselves. As I sat there reflecting on this, my daughter suddenly ran over. She was smiling. Her cheeks were red from running. "Mom, are you having fun?" she asked. A few weeks earlier, that question would have made me uncomfortable. This time, I smiled honestly. "Yes," I said. "I am." The answer surprised both of us. Because it was true. Nothing extraordinary was happening. No major accomplishment. No special event. No dramatic breakthrough. I was simply present. And somehow, that was enough. Later that evening, another observation changed the way I viewed my life. My husband and I were sitting on the back patio after dinner. The sun was setting. The air was calm. Our daughter was inside finishing homework. Normally, I would have spent that time organizing something or preparing for the next day. Instead, we talked. Really talked. Not about schedules or responsibilities. About life. About memories. About things we hope to do in the future. During the conversation, my husband said something that caught me completely off guard. "You seem different lately." I laughed. "Different how?" He thought for a moment. "More relaxed. More here. More here." It was the same observation my daughter had made earlier. Suddenly, a pattern emerged. The people closest to me were not noticing changes in my productivity. They were noticing changes in my presence. That distinction felt incredibly important. For years, I believed my value came from what I accomplished. Yet the people I loved most seemed to care far more about how I showed up emotionally. This idea aligns with findings from relationship research. Strong connections are rarely built through perfection. They are built through attention, responsiveness, and shared experiences. In other words, people often remember how you made them feel more than what you achieved. The realization was humbling. It also forced me to confront an uncomfortable truth. I had spent years trying to earn love through effort, even though my family had been offering love freely all along. The more I thought about this, the more I noticed similar patterns everywhere. Neighbors talking on front porches. Families walking together after dinner. Friends meeting for coffee. Grandparents playing with grandchildren. These moments rarely appeared impressive from the outside. Yet they seemed to contain a quality that many modern adults are desperately searching for. Connection. Genuine human connection. In the United States, conversations about mental health, loneliness, and burnout have become increasingly common. Studies continue to show that despite advances in technology and convenience, many people feel more isolated than ever before. The irony is striking. We are more connected digitally, yet often less connected personally. As I reflected on this trend, I began understanding something my daughter had recognized long before I did. Life is not experienced in achievements. It is experienced in moments. Achievements matter. Goals matter. Responsibility matters. But if they consume all our attention, we risk missing the very experiences that give those achievements meaning. One evening, while watching the sun disappear below the horizon, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Gratitude. Not gratitude for a future milestone. Not gratitude for solving every problem. Gratitude for what already existed. My husband. My daughter. My home. My community. My life as it was. The feeling was simple, yet powerful. And in that moment, I began realizing that my daughter's lesson was much bigger than happiness. She was teaching me about awareness. About presence. About paying attention before life slips by unnoticed. But the deeper I explored this lesson, the more another question emerged. If I had spent years measuring my worth through sacrifice, where had that belief come from in the first place? The answer would lead me back through the story of my marriage, revealing a truth I had overlooked for years and bringing me one step closer to understanding the full lesson my daughter had been trying to teach me all along. The hidden struggle in modern families. If you walked through my neighborhood on a warm evening, you would probably see something that looks comforting. Families eating dinner together. Children riding bikes. Couples walking hand in hand. Front porches glowing under soft lights. It looks like the kind of life many people dream about. And in many ways, it is. But over the past few weeks, after my daughter's questions forced me to slow down and pay attention, I started noticing something else hidden beneath the surface. Something that almost nobody talks about openly. Something affecting families across America regardless of income, education, or background. The hidden struggle was not a lack of love. It was a lack of presence. The more I observed, the more impossible it became to ignore. One evening, I watched a father push his daughter on a swing while continuously checking his phone. Nearby, a mother sat on a bench scrolling through messages while her son repeatedly called her name. At a restaurant, I noticed a family sitting together at one table while each person looked at a different screen. Nobody appeared unhappy. Nobody was arguing. Yet something important seemed to be missing. Connection. Real connection. The kind that cannot be measured by how much time people spend together, but by how much attention they give each other. The realization hit me hard because I recognized myself in those scenes. For years, I had believed that being physically present was enough. If I attended school events, prepared meals, managed schedules, and took care of responsibilities, then surely I was showing love. But my daughter had revealed something uncomfortable. Presence and attention are not the same thing. You can be in the same room with someone while mentally living somewhere else entirely. In fact, many adults spend large portions of their lives doing exactly that. Psychologists often refer to this as attentional fragmentation. Modern technology, constant notifications, work demands, and endless responsibilities compete for our focus every minute of the day. As a result, many people rarely experience uninterrupted attention. The human brain becomes trapped in a cycle of switching between tasks, concerns, and distractions. Over time, this affects relationships more than most people realize. One Saturday morning, my daughter and I were having breakfast together when she asked me a question that seemed simple at first. "Mom, why do grown-ups always look busy?" I smiled because the question sounded innocent. Then I paused because I wasn't sure how to answer. Why do grown-ups always look busy? The truth is that many adults wear busyness almost like a badge of honor. We proudly announce how packed our schedules are. We compare workloads. We talk about being overwhelmed as though it proves our importance. Somewhere along the way, being busy became associated with being successful. Yet research tells a more complicated story. Studies consistently show that chronic busyness and constant stress can reduce life satisfaction, increase anxiety, and weaken relationships. Ironically, many people sacrifice the very things they are working so hard to protect. I thought about this while watching my daughter eat breakfast. She wasn't concerned about maximizing efficiency. She wasn't multitasking. She wasn't planning 6 steps ahead. She was simply enjoying pancakes. The contrast felt almost funny. Here was a child fully engaged with breakfast while millions of adults across the country were probably eating meals while answering emails, checking notifications, and worrying about future obligations. That afternoon, another observation deepened my understanding. Our family attended a local community event. Music played in the background. Food vendors lined the streets. Children ran from one activity to another. At first glance, everyone appeared happy. Then I started paying attention to conversations. Many adults seemed exhausted. They talked about work deadlines, financial pressure, school schedules, rising costs, career concerns, family obligations. The topics varied, but the emotional theme felt surprisingly similar. People were carrying enormous mental loads. Sociologists often describe this as invisible labor. It includes planning, remembering, organizing, anticipating problems, managing emotions, and coordinating countless details that keep families functioning. Much of this work happens silently. Nobody sees it. Nobody applauds it. Yet it consumes enormous amounts of mental energy. As I listened, I realized how many people were fighting battles that remained completely invisible to outsiders. That realization made me less judgmental and more compassionate. It also helped me understand why so many families appear successful while quietly struggling. The issue isn't necessarily dysfunction. Often, it is overload. Too many responsibilities competing for too little attention. That evening, after returning home, I found myself thinking about my marriage. Not the difficult moments. Not the disagreements. The ordinary years in between. The years when my husband and I worked hard to build a life together. Looking back, I noticed something surprising. The strongest memories were not connected to achievements. They weren't about promotions, purchases, or milestones. Instead, they involved simple moments. Long conversations. Shared laughter. Road trips. Quiet evenings. Unexpected adventures. Times when we were fully present with each other. This observation aligns closely with decades of psychological research. Human beings adapt quickly to material improvements. The excitement of a new purchase often fades. External achievements become normal. Meaningful experiences and relationships, however, tend to create deeper and more lasting emotional impact. In other words, connection ages better than accomplishment. The more I reflected on this, the more I understood the hidden struggle affecting modern families. Most people are not failing because they don't care. They are struggling because life continuously competes for their attention. Work demands attention. Technology demands attention. Responsibilities demand attention. Stress demands attention. Eventually, relationships receive whatever attention remains. Unfortunately, that is often not enough. One evening, my daughter sat beside me while I read a book. After a few minutes, she leaned against my shoulder. Neither of us said much. We simply sat there quietly. It was an ordinary moment. Yet it felt meaningful. Why? Because neither of us was distracted. Neither of us was rushing toward the next task. We were sharing the same moment completely. Researchers studying attachment and family relationships consistently emphasize the importance of these seemingly small interactions. Emotional security is often built through repeated experiences of attention, responsiveness, and presence. Grand gestures are memorable. Small moments are transformative. As this realization settled into my mind, I began seeing my daughter's lesson more clearly. She wasn't teaching me how to become more productive. She wasn't encouraging me to abandon responsibility. She wasn't suggesting that life should be easy. She was showing me something far more valuable. She was showing me that attention is one of the greatest gifts we can give. Attention to our families. Attention to our relationships. Attention to ourselves. Attention to the life unfolding directly in front of us. Yet despite everything I had learned so far, one mystery remained unsolved. Why had I become so dependent on proving my worth through constant effort? Why did slowing down feel uncomfortable for so many years? The answer was hidden inside my own marriage story, and when I finally recognized it, I discovered a lesson that connected every question my daughter had asked from the very beginning. A lesson from my own marriage. Sometimes the answers we spend years searching for are hiding inside memories we rarely revisit. After my daughter's questions changed the way I looked at daily life, I found myself thinking more about my marriage than I had in a long time. Not because there was a problem. In fact, that was what made the realization so surprising. My husband and I had built a good life together. We respected each other. We supported each other. We had overcome challenges, celebrated milestones, and raised a wonderful daughter. From the outside, our marriage looked stable. From the inside, it was stable. Yet as I reflected more deeply, I began noticing a pattern that had quietly shaped many of my decisions for years. It was a pattern I never intended to create, and once I saw it, I could not stop seeing it. The realization began on an ordinary evening. My husband and I were sitting on the back porch after dinner. The sun had disappeared behind the trees, and the neighborhood was settling into its usual nighttime rhythm. Porch lights flickered on. Dogs barked in the distance. A cool breeze moved through the yard. It was one of those simple American evenings that often pass unnoticed because they seem too ordinary to remember. We were talking about our daughter and laughing about something funny she had said earlier that day when my husband suddenly asked a question. "Can I tell you something?" His tone was calm, but something about it immediately caught my attention. "Of course," I replied. He smiled gently before speaking. "I think you've been carrying more than you needed to carry." At first, I laughed. The statement sounded obvious. Every parent carries responsibilities. Every marriage involves work. Every family requires effort. But he wasn't finished. "What do you mean?" I asked. He paused for a moment. Then he said something that completely changed the direction of my thinking. "I don't think anybody asked you to be responsible for everyone's happiness." The words hit me with surprising force. Not because they were critical. Not because they were harsh. Because they were true. For years, I had quietly assigned myself a role that nobody had officially given me. Somewhere along the way, I decided it was my job to keep everything running smoothly. If someone felt stressed, I wanted to fix it. If a problem appeared, I wanted to solve it. If something went wrong, I felt responsible. The strange part was that I never consciously chose this role. It developed gradually. Small decisions became habits. Habits became expectations. Expectations became identity. Before I realized what was happening, I had started measuring my value through how much I could carry. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as overfunctioning. It occurs when a person consistently takes on more responsibility than necessary, often believing that everything depends on them. While the behavior usually comes from good intentions, it can create exhaustion, resentment, anxiety, and emotional imbalance. As my husband continued talking, I began recognizing pieces of myself in that description. He reminded me of moments I had forgotten. Times when he offered help and I insisted on handling things alone. Times when he encouraged me to rest and I refused because I felt guilty. Times when I turned manageable situations into stressful ones simply because I believed I had to do everything perfectly. Then he said something that completely stopped me. "You know what I think our daughter sees?" I looked at him. "What?" He smiled. "I think she sees someone who loves her very much. But I also think she sees someone who forgets that she's allowed to enjoy life too." The words lingered in the silence between us. Suddenly, memories began resurfacing. Not painful memories. Ordinary memories. Moments from our marriage that now looked different through the lens of my daughter's questions. I remembered vacations where I spent more time organizing than relaxing. Holidays where I focused so much on making everything perfect that I barely enjoyed the celebration. Family gatherings where I worried about details while everyone else enjoyed the experience. The pattern was impossible to ignore. I had become so committed to creating happiness for others that I often excluded myself from it. The irony was almost unbelievable. I was working hard to protect the very things that were being diminished by my approach. The next few days brought even more clarity. I started reflecting on the early years of our relationship. Back then, life was simpler. We had fewer responsibilities. Less pressure. Fewer expectations. Yet one thing stood out above everything else. We laughed more. Not because life was easier. Because we were more present. We spent time talking without multitasking. We took walks without checking schedules. We enjoyed small experiences without worrying about productivity. Somewhere along the journey into adulthood, I had started treating joy as a reward rather than a necessity. I believed enjoyment should come after the work was done. The problem was that the work was never done. There was always another responsibility waiting around the corner. Another task. Another deadline. Another obligation. If happiness depended on reaching the end of the list, happiness would always remain just out of reach. Researchers studying well-being have repeatedly found that people who integrate enjoyment into everyday life report higher levels of satisfaction than those who postpone happiness indefinitely. The lesson sounds simple, but living it can be surprisingly difficult. Many adults become trapped in a cycle of delayed living. We tell ourselves we'll relax later, travel later, enjoy life later, spend time with loved ones later. The future becomes a storage room for everything meaningful. Meanwhile, the present quietly passes by. One evening, while looking through old family photos, I noticed something remarkable. The moments that mattered most were rarely the carefully planned ones. They were spontaneous, imperfect, unexpected. A silly family joke. A rainy afternoon spent indoors together. A random road trip. A shared laugh over something insignificant. None of those memories required perfection. They required presence. That realization connected directly to what my daughter had been trying to teach me from the beginning. She wasn't asking complicated questions about psychology, marriage, or personal growth. She was asking questions about attention. Questions about how people choose to spend their lives. Questions about whether love includes yourself or only everyone else. The deeper I reflected, the more I understood something important about modern family life in America. Many people are not struggling because they lack opportunities. They are struggling because they are carrying invisible expectations that nobody asked them to carry. Expectations to be perfect parents, perfect partners, perfect providers, perfect caregivers, perfect professionals. The weight becomes so familiar that it starts feeling normal. Yet normal does not always mean healthy. Sitting beside my husband one quiet evening, I finally admitted something I had never said out loud before. I think I've been making life harder than it needed to be. He smiled softly. I think you're finally realizing that. For the first time, I did not feel defensive. I felt relieved. Because recognizing a problem is often the first step toward freedom from it. My daughter's lesson was becoming clearer with every passing day. But the most important piece had not arrived yet. I still needed to understand what would happen if I actually changed. What if I stopped measuring my worth through constant sacrifice? What if I approached life differently? What if small changes could create bigger results than years of overworking ever had? The answer was about to reveal itself in a way I never expected. The small changes I made. Most people expect life-changing lessons to produce life-changing actions. They imagine dramatic transformations, big announcements, bold decisions, complete reinventions. That is exactly what I expected too. After all the questions from my daughter, all the reflection about my marriage, and all the uncomfortable truths I had uncovered about myself, I assumed the next step would involve something significant. Instead, what happened was almost laughably small. And yet those tiny changes ended up creating some of the biggest shifts I had experienced in years. The reason this surprised me is because modern culture often celebrates dramatic stories. We love before and after transformations. We admire overnight success. We pay attention to extreme results. What we rarely celebrate are small daily adjustments. Yet behavioral scientists have spent decades showing that sustainable change usually begins with tiny actions repeated consistently over time. The challenge is that small changes often feel too insignificant to matter. That is exactly why most people underestimate them. A few days after my conversation with my husband, I made a simple decision. I would stop trying to fix my entire life at once. Instead, I would focus on one small behavior. Presence. Just presence. No complicated system. No ambitious plan. No impossible goals. I simply wanted to be more present in the moments that were already happening. The first experiment began at breakfast. Normally, I would prepare food while checking messages, reviewing schedules, and mentally planning the day ahead. This time, I left my phone in another room. It felt surprisingly uncomfortable. For the first few minutes, I kept thinking about what I might be missing. Emails. Notifications. Updates. The urge to check was almost automatic. Then something unexpected happened. Because I wasn't distracted, I actually listened to my daughter. Not just her words. Her stories. her excitement, her observations about school. At one point she spent nearly 2 minutes explaining why she thought a squirrel near the playground was secretly the smartest animal in the neighborhood. Under normal circumstances, I might have smiled politely while thinking about something else. This time, I listened. The story was ridiculous. It was also hilarious. We ended up laughing together. The entire interaction lasted only a few minutes, but it felt different. It felt real. That experience reminded me of an important psychological principle. Human beings often underestimate the emotional impact of attention. We assume relationships are strengthened by major events when, in reality, they are frequently strengthened by repeated moments of genuine engagement. One attentive conversation can create a stronger memory than an hour of distracted interaction. Encouraged by this realization, I tried another small change. Every evening, instead of immediately moving to the next task after dinner, I spent 10 uninterrupted minutes with my family. 10 minutes sounds insignificant. Most people waste more than that scrolling through social media without noticing. Yet those 10 minutes quickly became one of the most meaningful parts of my day. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we played a simple game. Sometimes we shared stories. Sometimes we sat together and laughed about nothing important. What surprised me most was not how much my family enjoyed it. It was how much I enjoyed it. For years, I had been acting as though joy was something I needed to earn. These small moments revealed something different. Joy was already available. I simply needed to notice it. Around this time, I made another adjustment that felt almost revolutionary despite its simplicity. I stopped saying yes to everything. Not to important responsibilities. Not to my family. But to unnecessary pressure. This was much harder than I expected. Many people, especially caregivers, develop a habit of automatic agreement. We volunteer. We help. We take on extra tasks. We avoid disappointing others. Over time, these habits can create overwhelming schedules and constant stress. Research on boundaries consistently shows that healthy limits improve emotional well-being and relationship quality. Yet knowing that intellectually is very different from practicing it. The first time I politely declined an unnecessary commitment, I felt guilty. The second time felt slightly easier. By the fifth time, I noticed something remarkable. The world did not collapse. Nobody was angry. Nobody stopped loving me. The catastrophe I had imagined existed only inside my head. That realization was incredibly freeing. Another small change involved something my daughter accidentally inspired. One afternoon she was drawing at the kitchen table while I organized paperwork nearby. After a few minutes, she looked up and asked, "Why don't you ever draw anymore?" The question caught me off guard. I used to enjoy creative activities. Painting. Sketching. Writing. Over the years, however, those interests had slowly disappeared beneath responsibilities. Not because I consciously abandoned them. They simply became less urgent than everything else. That evening, I found an old notebook and started writing again. Nothing important. Just thoughts. Reflections. Observations. Yet the experience felt strangely refreshing. Psychologists often describe creative activities as restorative because they engage attention differently than problem-solving tasks. They provide mental recovery. They reconnect people with curiosity and intrinsic enjoyment. Within a few weeks, I noticed subtle changes in my mood. I felt calmer, more patient, less reactive. Not because my life became easier, because I was recovering more effectively from stress. The most surprising change, however, appeared inside my family. One evening my daughter said something that nearly made me cry. We were sitting together after dinner when she smiled and said, "You laugh more now." Such a simple observation. Yet it revealed more than any self-assessment could. Children notice emotional patterns with incredible accuracy. If she saw more laughter, it meant the change was real. My husband noticed it too. Our conversations felt more relaxed. We spent less time discussing logistics and more time discussing life. The difference was not dramatic. It was cumulative. Small improvements building on one another day after day. This mirrors what researchers often find when studying happiness and relationship satisfaction. Positive experiences accumulate. Tiny moments matter. Repeated attention matters. Consistent presence matters. The benefits grow over time, often becoming visible only in hindsight. Looking back, I realized something fascinating. None of my changes involved major sacrifices. I did not need to move, change careers, spend large amounts of money, or reinvent my identity. Instead, I adjusted the way I approached ordinary moments. That insight felt incredibly important because so many people believe meaningful change requires dramatic action. Sometimes it does. More often, however, transformation begins with awareness. Awareness changes behavior. Behavior changes experiences. Experiences change relationships. Relationships change lives. One evening, while watching my daughter finish a school project, I remembered the question that had started everything. "Mom, when are you happy?" For the first time, I had an answer. Not a perfect answer. Not a complete answer. But a real one. I was happy in moments like this. Moments of connection. Presence. Laughter. Gratitude. Imperfect moments that I once overlooked because I was too busy chasing the next responsibility. Yet as powerful as this realization was, an even bigger surprise was waiting ahead. Because the small changes I had made were producing results I never expected. Results that would soon reveal the full truth behind the lesson my daughter had been trying to teach me all along. Something unexpected happened. The strange thing about personal growth is that it rarely announces itself. There is usually no dramatic soundtrack. No flashing sign that says, "Congratulations, your life is changing." Most of the time, transformation happens so quietly that you do not notice it until one day you look around and realize something feels different. That is exactly what happened to me. After making those small changes, listening more carefully, being more present, creating healthier boundaries, and allowing myself to enjoy simple moments, I expected life to feel slightly better. What I did not expect was what happened next. The changes started showing up in places I never intended to change. At first, the signs were subtle. My mornings felt calmer. Not because there was less to do. There wasn't. My schedule remained busy. Family responsibilities remained real. Life continued presenting unexpected challenges. Yet somehow the pressure felt lighter. The tasks had not changed. My relationship with the tasks had changed. Psychologists sometimes describe this phenomenon as cognitive reframing. The external circumstances stay largely the same, but the way a person interprets those circumstances shifts. That shift can dramatically influence stress levels, emotional resilience, and overall well-being. At the time, I was not thinking about psychology. I was simply noticing that I no longer woke up feeling as if I were already behind before the day had even started. One morning, while drinking coffee at the kitchen table, I experienced something that had become surprisingly rare over the years. Silence. Not an empty silence. A peaceful one. No rushing. No panic. No mental sprint toward the next obligation. Just a quiet moment before the day began. As I sat there, my daughter walked into the kitchen. She smiled and sat beside me. We talked for a few minutes about school, friends, and a book she was reading. The conversation was ordinary. Yet something about it felt extraordinary. I was fully there. More importantly, she knew it. Children possess an incredible ability to detect emotional availability. They may not understand complex adult responsibilities, but they immediately notice when someone is truly paying attention. A few weeks earlier, I would have been thinking about 10 other things while she spoke. Now I was simply listening. That small difference created a surprisingly large emotional impact. As the days passed, I began noticing changes in my daughter as well. She seemed more open, more talkative, more likely to share details about her day. At first, I assumed it was a coincidence. Then I came across an interesting concept in developmental psychology. Researchers have found that children often mirror the emotional patterns they experience from caregivers. When adults become more attentive and emotionally available, children frequently respond by becoming more communicative and secure. In other words, connection tends to create more connection. The realization fascinated me because it explained something I was witnessing in real time. The changes I made for myself were improving my relationships too. Yet the biggest surprise was still ahead. One Saturday afternoon, my husband and I were cleaning the garage. It was hardly a glamorous activity. Dusty boxes. Old tools. Forgotten holiday decorations. The kind of project most people postpone until they absolutely have to deal with it. While sorting through old storage bins, we discovered a box filled with photographs and family keepsakes. We stopped working and started looking through them. What began as a short break turned into nearly an hour of reminiscing. We laughed at old hairstyles, remembered forgotten vacations, shared stories our daughter had never heard before. At one point, my husband looked at me and smiled. "You know what's funny," he said. "What?" I asked. "This would have driven you crazy a few months ago." I laughed because he was right. The old version of me would have worried about finishing the garage, staying on schedule, completing the task efficiently. Instead, I was enjoying the interruption. That realization felt surprisingly emotional. For years, I had treated interruptions as obstacles. Now I was beginning to see that some of life's most meaningful moments arrive disguised as interruptions. Researchers studying happiness often emphasize the importance of savoring positive experiences. The ability to fully engage with enjoyable moments significantly increases their emotional impact. Yet many adults rush through these experiences because they are focused on the next responsibility. Looking back, I realized I had spent years doing exactly that. The result was a life filled with accomplishments but often lacking appreciation. Another unexpected change appeared in my marriage. The improvement was not dramatic enough for a movie script. It was better than that. It was real. Our conversations became deeper. We laughed more often. Small disagreements seemed less significant. There was a greater sense of partnership rather than performance. One evening, my husband made an observation that stayed with me. "You seem lighter," he said. The word caught my attention. Lighter. Not happier. Not more productive. Lighter. After thinking about it, I realized it was the perfect description. The responsibilities had not disappeared. Life had not become easier. I simply stopped carrying unnecessary weight. The weight of perfection. The weight of unrealistic expectations. The weight of believing I was responsible for everyone's happiness. Letting go of those burdens created space for something else. Joy. Presence. Gratitude. Curiosity. As this transformation continued, I started noticing similar patterns in people around me. Friends who constantly apologized for resting. Parents who felt guilty whenever they took time for themselves. Couples who spent more time managing schedules than nurturing relationships. The hidden struggle my daughter had unknowingly exposed was far more common than I realized. Many people are trapped in cycles of constant effort. They believe their worth depends on productivity. They postpone joy until after the work is finished. The tragedy is that the work is never completely finished. There will always be another task. Another challenge. Another responsibility. If happiness remains permanently postponed, it never arrives. One evening, while helping my daughter with homework, she looked at me and said something so simple that I nearly missed its significance. "I like this version of you." I froze. "What do you mean?" She shrugged casually. "You smile more." Then she returned to her homework as if she had not just delivered one of the most powerful observations of my life. Her words stayed with me long after she went to bed. Because they confirmed something important. The lesson she had been teaching me was working. Not perfectly. Not instantly. But genuinely. The changes were real enough for the people closest to me to notice. And if they could see it, perhaps I was finally moving in the right direction. Yet despite all these improvements, one final piece of the puzzle remained. I understood that my daughter's questions had changed me. I understood that presence mattered. I understood that happiness could not always be postponed. But I still had not fully identified the lesson hidden beneath everything she had been trying to show me. The answer was closer than ever now, and when it finally arrived, it would transform a simple family conversation into the most important lesson of my entire life. The truth behind my daughter's lesson. Have you ever spent weeks searching for an answer, only to realize it was hidden inside a sentence you had already heard? That is exactly what happened to me. By this point, my life felt different. Not completely different. My responsibilities were still there. My family was still the same family. My home was still the same home. Yet something fundamental had shifted. I felt more present. More connected. More aware. The pressure I used to carry every day no longer seemed as heavy. My daughter noticed it. My husband noticed it. Even I noticed it. But despite all these changes, one question continued following me. What exactly was the lesson my daughter had been trying to teach me from the very beginning? I understood the effects. I could see the improvements. What I had not yet fully understood was the deeper truth beneath them. Then, one ordinary evening, the answer finally arrived. And like most important truths, it arrived quietly. We were sitting together after dinner. Nothing special was happening. No major family discussion. No dramatic emotional moment. My daughter was working on a school assignment at the dining table. I was nearby reading. At one point she looked up and asked for help with a question from one of her worksheets. I walked over and sat beside her. The assignment involved reflecting on a personal challenge. One question asked students to describe something difficult they had learned. My daughter stared at the paper for a moment before writing her answer. Naturally, I became curious. "What did you write?" I asked. She smiled and handed me the page. The answer was short. Very short. Yet it stopped me instantly. She had written, "I learned that getting better is more important than being perfect." For a few seconds, I simply stared at the sentence. Then something extraordinary happened. Every conversation we had shared over the previous weeks suddenly connected together. Every question. Every observation. Every uncomfortable realization. They all pointed toward the same truth. Getting better is more important than being perfect. My daughter had not been asking about happiness because she wanted a specific answer. She had been noticing a pattern. She had been observing a mother who spent years chasing perfection while unintentionally overlooking progress. A mother who measured success by how much she accomplished rather than how much she experienced. A mother who believed she needed to earn happiness instead of allowing herself to live it. In that moment, I realized that perfection had been the invisible force behind so many of my struggles. Not obvious perfection. The kind that appears in magazine advertisements or social media posts. A quieter version. The belief that I should always have the right answer. The belief that I should always be strong. The belief that I should always be available. The belief that I should always be doing more. Psychologists often refer to perfectionism as a hidden source of chronic stress. Unlike healthy ambition, perfectionism creates standards that are often impossible to satisfy. No matter how much a person accomplishes, it never feels sufficient because perfection always remains slightly out of reach. Looking back, I could finally see how deeply that mindset had shaped my life. It influenced my parenting, my marriage, my expectations, even my relationship with myself. The irony was almost unbelievable. In trying to become the best version of myself, I had often made it harder to enjoy being myself at all. That realization was powerful enough. But the story did not end there. A few days later, another moment confirmed what I was beginning to understand. My daughter came home from school excited about a project she had completed. She proudly showed it to me. The project was not perfect. There were mistakes. Small flaws. Areas that could have been improved. Yet she was smiling. "Are you proud of it?" I asked. "Yes," she said immediately. "Why?" She looked surprised by the question. "Because I did better than last time." Her answer felt almost revolutionary. Better than last time. Not perfect. Better. Improvement instead of perfection. Growth instead of comparison. Progress instead of pressure. The simplicity of her thinking was remarkable. Researchers studying motivation consistently find that people who focus on progress tend to experience greater persistence, confidence, and satisfaction than those who obsess over flawless outcomes. Children often understand this naturally. Adults frequently forget it. Somewhere along the journey into adulthood, many people stop measuring improvement and start measuring perfection. The result is predictable. They become discouraged even while making progress. They overlook growth because it does not match impossible standards. They focus on what remains unfinished instead of appreciating how far they have come. As these ideas settled into my mind, I began viewing my own life differently. I was not failing because I occasionally felt overwhelmed. I was learning. I was not falling short because I needed rest. I was human. I was not weak because I could not do everything perfectly. Nobody can. The lesson my daughter had been teaching me was not about reducing responsibility. It was about changing perspective. The goal was never perfection. The goal was growth. One evening, I shared this realization with my husband. After listening quietly, he smiled. "That's what I've been trying to tell you for years." We both laughed. The truth often arrives from multiple directions before we finally hear it. My daughter simply happened to ask the questions at exactly the right time. What fascinated me most was how this lesson applied far beyond our family. Across the United States, countless people are carrying invisible pressure. Parents trying to be perfect. Professionals trying to be perfect. Students trying to be perfect. Partners trying to be perfect. Social media amplifies these pressures by constantly presenting carefully edited versions of reality. People compare their ordinary lives to everyone else's highlight reels. The comparison is exhausting. More importantly, it is unnecessary. Real life is not built from perfection. It is built from moments, conversations, efforts, mistakes, growth, connection. The more I understood this, the more grateful I became for my daughter's questions. Without realizing it, she had interrupted a pattern that could have continued for years. She had forced me to examine assumptions I never questioned. She had helped me see that happiness was not waiting somewhere in the future. It was already present inside ordinary moments I had been overlooking. Yet one final realization remained. It was the most important one of all. The lesson was not simply about happiness. It was not simply about perfection. It was about value. My value as a wife. My value as a mother. My value as a person. And when that final realization arrived, it changed the way I viewed myself forever. That realization would become the answer to the title of this story and the most important lesson my daughter ever taught me. The answer changed my life. What was the lesson? After all the questions, all the uncomfortable realizations, all the conversations with my daughter, and all the changes that slowly transformed my daily life, what was the single lesson powerful enough to change the way I viewed myself, my family, my marriage, and my future? The answer was surprisingly simple. So simple, in fact, that I almost overlooked it. My daughter taught me that my value does not come from how much I do for others. My value comes from who I am, even when I am not accomplishing anything at all. The moment I truly understood this, something inside me shifted. For years, I had unknowingly attached my self-worth to productivity. If I completed enough tasks, I felt successful. If I solved enough problems, I felt useful. If everyone around me seemed happy, I felt valuable. At first glance, that mindset appears responsible, even admirable. But hidden beneath it is a dangerous message. It teaches a person that worth must be earned continuously. It suggests that rest requires justification. It implies that simply being is not enough. The problem is that no human being can sustain that belief forever without paying a price. Eventually, exhaustion arrives. Resentment arrives. Disappointment arrives. Not because the person lacks strength, but because the standard itself is impossible. One evening, several weeks after my daughter's first question, our family was sitting together in the living room. Nothing remarkable was happening. My husband was reading. My daughter was working on a small art project. I was enjoying a quiet moment with a cup of tea. A few months earlier, I probably would have viewed this scene differently. I would have looked for something productive to do. I would have worried about tomorrow's schedule. I would have felt guilty for sitting still. This time was different. I simply enjoyed being there. As I watched my family, I realized something important. None of them needed me to be perfect. They never had. My husband did not love me because I managed every detail flawlessly. My daughter did not love me because I completed endless tasks. They loved me because I was their wife. Their mother. A person, not a machine. The realization sounds obvious now. Yet many adults spend years forgetting it. Research on self-worth consistently shows that people who base their value primarily on external achievements often experience greater anxiety and lower life satisfaction than those who develop a more stable sense of intrinsic worth. In simple terms, if your value depends entirely on performance, your confidence becomes fragile. Every mistake feels threatening. Every setback feels personal. Every imperfection feels like failure. My daughter had unknowingly challenged that entire framework with a few innocent questions. When are you happy? Do you have fun? What makes you happy? Those questions forced me to confront a truth I had been avoiding. I knew how to take care of everyone else. I had forgotten how to take care of my relationship with myself. Once I recognized that, everything began changing. Not overnight. Real transformation rarely happens that way. Instead, it happened gradually. I became more present. I listened more carefully. I laughed more often. I worried less about perfection and paid more attention to progress. Most importantly, I stopped treating happiness as a destination and started treating it as a practice. This lesson became especially meaningful as I reflected on modern life in America. So many people are carrying invisible pressure. They are trying to be perfect parents, perfect spouses, perfect employees, perfect friends, perfect versions of themselves. The expectations seem endless. Technology makes comparison easier than ever. Social media presents carefully edited snapshots of success. People scroll through images of other lives and quietly wonder why their own lives feel messy by comparison. Yet the truth is that every family has challenges. Every marriage encounters obstacles. Every parent makes mistakes. Every human being struggles sometimes. Perfection is not the goal. Connection is. Growth is. Presence is. My daughter understood this before I did. One afternoon, not long ago, we were walking through our neighborhood together. The weather was beautiful. Children were playing outside. Neighbors waved as they passed. At one point, she reached over and held my hand. Then she smiled and said something I will never forget. "I like spending time with you now." The words were gentle. honest, completely free of judgment. Yet they carried tremendous meaning. She wasn't saying she had disliked me before. She was noticing the difference. She was noticing that I was truly there. That moment meant more to me than any achievement I could remember. Because it confirmed something I had been learning throughout this journey. The greatest gift we can offer the people we love is not perfection. It is presence. Presence when they speak. Presence when they struggle. Presence during ordinary moments that will one day become precious memories. Looking back, I can see that my daughter's lesson arrived at exactly the right time. If she had not asked those questions, I might have continued living on autopilot for years. I might have continued measuring success through productivity alone. I might have continued postponing happiness until some imaginary future moment when everything was finally finished. The irony, of course, is that life is never finished. There is always another task. Another challenge. Another responsibility waiting around the corner. If we insist on waiting until everything is perfect, we may spend our entire lives waiting. That is why the answer to this story matters so much. My daughter taught me that happiness is not found after perfection. Happiness is found during the journey. She taught me that growth matters more than flawless performance. She taught me that attention is more valuable than efficiency. She taught me that people remember how we make them feel far longer than they remember how productive we were. Most importantly, she taught me that being enough and becoming better can exist at the same time. You can strive for improvement without believing you are inadequate. You can pursue goals without sacrificing joy. You can care deeply about others without abandoning yourself. That lesson changed my marriage. It changed my parenting. It changed the way I experience everyday life. And perhaps it can help someone listening to this story right now. Maybe you have been carrying invisible pressure. Maybe you have been measuring your worth through accomplishments. Maybe you have been postponing happiness until some future version of life finally arrives. If so, consider the lesson that changed everything for me. You do not need to be perfect to be valuable. You do not need to earn the right to enjoy your life. And you do not need to wait until everything is finished before allowing yourself to be happy. Sometimes the wisest teacher in the room is the person you thought you were teaching. My daughter certainly was. Before you leave, I want you to think about something. What if the thing making you tired is not your job, your responsibilities, or even your problems? What if it is the invisible belief that you must be perfect before you deserve peace? For years, I thought I was teaching my daughter how to live. I thought I was showing her responsibility, strength, and sacrifice. But in the end, she taught me something far more valuable. Life is not a test you have to pass perfectly. Life is a collection of moments you are meant to experience fully. One day, your children may not remember every meal you cooked, every bill you paid, or every task you completed. But they will remember how you made them feel. They will remember whether you were truly there. They will remember your smile, your laughter, your presence, and the love you shared in ordinary moments. And maybe that is the real success story. Not becoming perfect. Not having everything figured out. But learning how to enjoy the people you love while you still have the chance. So here is a question I would like you to carry with you after this video ends. If someone you love asked you today, when are you truly happy? What would your answer be? Take a moment and think about it. Because the answer might reveal more about your life than you expect. And who knows? The next lesson that changes your life may come from the person you least expect, just as mine came from my daughter. If this story touched your heart, helped your English listening practice, or reminded you of someone special in your life, please support the channel. Subscribe, like, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next Slow English story. Every week, we share inspiring real-life stories, family lessons, love stories, marriage journeys, personal growth insights, and slow English reading practice designed to help you improve your English naturally while enjoying meaningful stories. And before you go, leave a comment below. What is the most important lesson a child has ever taught you? I read as many comments as possible, and your story may inspire someone else around the world. Until next time, take care of yourself, treasure the people you love, keep practicing English one small step at a time, and remember, you do not have to be perfect to live a beautiful life. See you in the next story.